Few American sports figures have generated the emotion of players, peers, fans, and detractors like Robert Montgomery Knight. In his 29 years as head coach, he led Indiana University to 11 Big Ten basketball championships and 3 NCAA titles. He's the only coach to win an NCAA championship and both gold medals in the Pan American Games and the Olympics. But it was what happened off the court that, for better or worse, put the outspoken coach and the name Indiana University in the spotlight. From his players, he demanded effort on the court and in the classroom. From everyone else, he demanded respect. Ultimately, it was what was demanded of him that led to the end of an era in Indiana basketball. WTTV has chronicled the Bob Knight story since 1971. Over the next 2 nights, the coach has invited us into his home as he writes the final chapter in his own words. Tomorrow night, we'll hear the general side of this week's past events. Tonight, we begin our exclusive conversation with the golden years of Bob Knight, his first 25 at Indiana, after these messages. We're joined by Bob Hamill, the longtime sports editor of the Bloomington Herald. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Joining in the memories of these Indiana University basketball moments with Coach Bob Knight. And it's bittersweet looking back, but for the first 25 years at Indiana, so many positive memories.
Oh, believe me, there's nothing bittersweet about looking back over the memories of the kids and the teams that have played here. There are maybe some decisions at timeouts I might like to have changed, or maybe something in the last 15 seconds of different games I wish could have been different. But the basketball and the players and the fans from beginning to end have been, I think, really exceptional.
Talk a little bit about your first trip to Bloomington, your actual hiring as the new head coach at Indiana.
Well, I think I actually, Mark, was hired in Houston, Texas at the NCAA Finals. There was a committee of 4 people, which impressed me right off the bat because I had been interviewed at other places with as many as 16 or 17 people on the interview committee, which was always, I used to look at that and I say, wow, 16 different agendas here. This is going to be interesting. But the 4 people were really interesting, intelligent, and very, very thorough people. And the group was headed by Bill Orwig, the athletic director, who became very, very close to me. Ed Cady, who was a very good friend, the faculty representative. Bill Smith, who had an insurance company in Indianapolis. And Skylar Otteson, who was the dean of the business school. And as he often reminds me, Harry Prater, one of my closest friends here in Bloomington, was slated to be there and became ill, and I believe Dr. Otteson took his place.
Bob Hamill, you remember those days well. I can remember headlines that said Bob who?
Yeah, but not on the Bloomington Herald Times. It was, we were right on top of that story. But there was a paper in Indianapolis, I think, that used that. Did I know much about Bob at that time? No. I knew that his Army teams won a lot of defensive championships, and I knew that they played a lot of 52 to 50 games really in that area. And I was
which was really an exciting revelation for Indiana fans.
Too sure that
really talk a little bit about that. They were the Hurricane Hoosiers. I mean, what were the feelings of fans at that point when they see a coach come in and talk about the discipline, talk about an offense that really wants to get the best shot every time down the floor?
Well, I think there was a certain shock, but it was overcome early with victories.
This is really a 12-hour show that we're trying to condense into about a half an hour, so we'll jump ahead to one of the players that was here when you arrived, and that was Steve Downing, who became truly an instrumental part of your early success, especially at your first NCAA.
Well, Steve was great. One of my most enjoyable memories of Steve is we're playing up at Wisconsin that year, and Joby Wright, who was a senior and did a really good job for us that year, is at the free throw line. Not a particularly good foul shooter. We're 1 point behind. There are 4 seconds to play, and Joby misses the first one. And I can remember picking up some things laying around the bench, not thinking that we've got a real good chance of getting this into overtime. And Joby kind of clanked the second one in. I think it hit every part of the rim and finally touched the net. And so we're in overtime. And we get started out pretty well, and maybe we get ahead by 6 or 7 points. And with about 2 minutes to go in the game, Steve fouls out. And I'm standing in front of the bench trying to figure out, well, do we want to play with another guard? Do we want to put a big kid in, probably Jerry Memering? Do I want him to go in? What do I want to do here? And while I'm contemplating this, Steve comes up from behind me and grabs me by the arm and spins me around and says, Coach, he's obviously really excited. Coach, don't let him take any more shots now. Don't let him take any more shots. And that was the first time that I thought I'd really gotten through as to what our offense was going to be about. I really think that the greatest singular individual performance that I've ever seen in basketball was Steve Downing in a double overtime game at Kentucky, playing down at Louisville. 50 minutes. He played every second of 50 minutes with a torn cartilage in his knee. He's probably spent the last 30 minutes just maybe walking up and down the floor. He scored 47 points, got 26 rebounds, and we won in overtime. And many years later, I was showing a film of that game, and Adolph Rupp and I were speaking on a clinic at Valley Forge just outside of Philadelphia. In fact, it may have been that very same spring. I guess it was. And as I'm showing the film, Rupp is constantly making comments to his group sitting around him. Well, they didn't take away the baseline there. And by God, did you see them miss that block out over there? Well, damn. I mean, they just got beat on the break there. Well, you know, if there's ever a question of divine intervention, just wait a while and something will happen, because it shows Downing on the free throw line. He's getting ready to shoot a free throw, and I hear Adolph from behind me say, well, I wonder how many we held that boy to. And I turned around and I said, Adolph, you held him to 47. You got any more questions? And I mean, within 30 seconds, Adolph and his entourage had departed the auditorium. It was great.
They probably got a little bit of justice in 1975 in what had to be one of the more difficult games ever to see Kentucky in the national championship, rather than your team that you really considered to be maybe your best ever.
Well, I think after Scott May had gotten hurt in a game up at Purdue, we went to Illinois to play. And sometimes really good things turn into disadvantages. And we're working out over in Champaign, and I take John Laskowski to the top of the key, and I said, Laz, you're going to start in Scott's place, and the first time you get the ball here, I want you to shoot it. The second time you get it from here, I want you to shoot it. And the third time, if they aren't covering you, I want you to shoot it. From the top of the key, John scored 28 points in that game. And we won 113-89. And what I had to do by playing Laskowski in May's spot is interchange Wilkerson a little bit with our defense. Now he would play the forward or he would play the guard, depending upon who was better. And Laz would play the other. And I broke up that tandem of Buckner and Wilkerson at the guards, which I think is the best defensive pair of guards I've ever seen in college basketball. And I wrestled with myself through the next 4 games. And to this day, if I could have one thing back in a game, it would be that game or the 4th foul that was called on Steve Downing in the UCLA game in 1973, which should have been Walton's 5th. But at that time, what I needed to do was bring Abernathy in May's place and make it a defensive team, just as we did the next year, which was essentially what we did. Steve Green was averaging 27 points a game during that stretch. So we had offense with Benson at center, and but our defense, when I had to split up Quinn and Bobby, just was not as good. But with Tommy in there playing forward, who was a heck of a defensive player, May was a very good defender, and that year played the best forward all the time. Well, as a really good defender, the next year, May played the second best forward because Tom played the best forward. So I made a real tactical mistake there by not thanking Laz, patting him on the back, which which was okay to do with that president, and be able to put Abernathy back into the lineup to replace May for defensive purposes.
You talk about your best defensive combination of guard ever, Buckner and Bobby Wilkerson. You had those two together in '76. You get to the championship game, you lose half when Wilkerson goes down with his concussion. And Michigan is a team you've seen way too many times already that year, and they've got great scoring guards. What is going through your mind at that point?
Well, the two guys that really held us together in the first half of that game were Jimmy Cruz and Scott May. And we were 6 down at the half. I think the score was 36-30 at the half. And we're 6 down, and then we made a change, and Jimmy Wisman came in, and Buckner played a little bit different role in our offense. And it was when I went back to the end of the season when it was all over and looked at that film, I thought how well Jimmy Cruz had played in the first half, and yet we took him out and used him in and out in the second half some, and yet as much as we had to appreciate what Wisman did in the second half, I had to feel the same way about Jimmy Cruz in the first half, because we'd have been in real trouble had it not been for him in the first half. So a little different combination, handling the ball a little bit differently, and our offense going from 29 points in the first half, I think all the way up to 37 in the second half, I think. 57, I'm sorry. Yeah, we had 86 points and go to 57 in the second half. So our offense became a lot better.
86-68 the final, your first national championship. 32-0. Never been repeated. Will it ever be repeated? An undefeated national champion.
People are still trying to hit 400. And that hasn't been done since 1941. And it's a great mark to shoot at, I think. I mean, that's the perfect season.
Bob Hamill, I'm going to direct this at you because I don't think that we'll get a legitimate answer from Coach Knight as to what he's meant in Landon Turner's life. Landon Turner in that 81 championship season was at the end,
yes.
the guy that carried that team. At the beginning, you would have never thought he would have seen the light of day in Philadelphia.
Well, Landon was up and down for 3 years, but the last 10 games of his career were as well as he could play. And
let me enter. They're as well as anybody could play.
Yeah, it was just wonderful to watch. And now to say he carried that team, I think he'd have to give number 11. A little guy out there played a little bit too, and Dober. There were a lot of players to whip.
But he was very much more effective with Landon Turner getting every rebound.
I would say you're right in that he was a key to their winning the national championship because his development late in the year made that team into a great basketball
team. A totally different team than the team you had earlier that year with Landon struggling.
We're playing up at Northwestern. There are 19 seconds to go, and we're ahead by 30-some points, and I put Landon in the game for the first time. And I turned to whoever was sitting beside me, and I said, based on his practice performance this week, this is going to be 18 seconds longer than he ought to play. A week later, we're playing Northwestern again in Bloomington. And I told Landon before the game, now as Bob mentioned, he's up and down. And there were a lot of ups in there over 2.5 years. I mean, he did a great job against a lot of people beginning as a freshman. We just could never get him really focused on playing, on academics, on anything. He was just kind of had a sloppy approach to everything. And so the next Saturday we're playing Northwestern at home, and I told Landon before the game, I said, now this is going to be your last game. I said, you're not going to get to play after this because when the game's over, I'm going to bring your folks in here and we're going to write a letter to the NBA indicating that you want to be drafted. And I think at that time when you submitted that letter, you lost your eligibility. And I said, but we got to let them know that you want to play because you got a better chance of playing in the NBA than you got playing here for me. And so with that, we go out to play the Northwestern game. With those words of encouragement and inspiration, we go out to play the Northwestern game. And about 10 minutes to go in the game, I put Landon in for the first time. And he immediately misses a block out, and Northwestern gets a tip in. I take him out right away. And I just said, sit down. And then I get to thinking, I say, now, when we write this letter to the NBA, it'll be good if Landon has just played very poorly in this game and everybody sees what I'm talking about. Said, Landon, get back in there. And I mean, for a little over 9 minutes, he plays like an all-time All-American. I mean, he defended, he rebounded, he blocked shots, he scored, he played great. After the game's over, and I mentioned Steve Downing as a guy who really, really cares. And we talked to Landon about how well he's played, about what, and it just seemed like everything fell into place. And from that time on, as Bob mentioned, the next 10 games, he may very well have been in almost each game, as you suggested, the outstanding player in the game. And I agree with you that Landon was as good as Isaiah was, or as good as Tolbert or Whitman could be, or whomever we had. Isaiah was Landon was the key figure. Was that a Freudian slip that I would agree
maybe a little bit
with you that Landon was the key figure in that team's. It wasn't even like a drive. It was like a hurricane to the national championship. I mean, nobody was even close to being as good as they were.
1987, a much different year. Was Steve Alford the player at the end you thought he was capable of being?
Well, I think when you talk about Steve, you're not talking about a great basketball player. You're talking about a great scorer, a great shooter. Steve was the best player without the ball that I've ever coached. I mean, he was smart, but even more than that, he was relentless without the ball. And I thought one thing Steve did that was instrumental in that team's success was how he handled things off the floor. You know, his dad was a coach and a very good coach, and Steve understood what it took to win, and he talked to these guys a lot about that. And that 87 team with Steve in a primary leadership role and his scoring, but the really unsung player on that team who was really good was who?
Darryl Thomas.
Darryl Thomas. To this day, if I talk about the best forwards that we've had since I've been here, there's no way I could neglect to mention Darryl Thomas. I mean, when we beat Syracuse in the championship game that year, he scored the quietest 20 points that anybody's ever scored in a game. Darryl, remember we brought Dean Garrett and Keith Smart in from junior college that year, and Darryl played the entire season like he had Garrett on a leash, and like he just moved him around. Dean go here, Dean go there, Dean go low, and he was just great for Dean Garrett.
Well, you know, the great thing about that was Darryl had to play center the year before.
Yeah.
So he matched up with these guys, and he really could do that really well.
And he was a very good post player. He was a good 15, 17-foot shooter, and he had a great way about him. Darryl Thomas was a heck of a player.
What he did with Dean was somewhat similar to what Steve was able to do with Keith Smart. I mean, I remember over at Ohio State, the Big Ten opener that year. Keith hit 5 straight threes. His first year of the three-point shot. And I think he was Big Ten Player of the Week. And Steve talked to him about, hey, forget that game, but you're going to be a bull. You got bullseye on your back now. And he did have a real tough game time in the next game.
But that's what I say. Steve had an understanding as a player of what it took to win, and he got other kids to think in that direction. And that's a tremendous help to a team. I mean, we've had other teams that were probably as talented as that team, that didn't come close to winning the national championship because the leadership on the floor would not have been close to what Darryl and Steve gave us.
One of my favorite pictures that I have at home is of '79. Bob and I both were at New York, of course, for the finals of the NIT, and then we came right out to Salt Lake City. He's working radio for CBS.
Yeah, Jim Host.
Yeah. So Rich Clarkson got me a picture of Bob in the press room with his press credentials, and I loved that.
I think it was NBC that had the radio there.
But he was there anyway, and you know, he always talks about the food we get, all that kind
of
thing.
I mean,
I didn't open think he passed up anything.
The great thing about that, I can remember with my press credential around my neck, waiting to interview Judd Heathcote. I mean, nothing may have irritated me. Well, certainly. I mean, Heathcote sees all of all of those of us who are in the press.
Yeah.
They're waiting to talk to
media
him.
guys.
And yeah, we media people, and I obviously was the last one he chose to call on.
Do you see yourself doing that now? Do you see yourself working in television?
No, not really. That at one time was something that really interested me. In 1981, I did had some conversations with CBS about going with them, which would be the first year they had the NCAA contract 20 years ago, and things just it just wasn't. As our conversations developed and moved along, it just wasn't the thing that I thought I wanted to do then. Although prior to that, I felt that would be an interesting thing to do after coaching. And one of the things I said to myself is, what do I want to do? Perhaps more than anything else in my life, outside of make things as good as I can for my family. And the thing that I came up with was to coach the Olympic team. I had been in between all kinds of things, too young for Korea, too old for Vietnam. I'd been in the Army, but I'd never been in the military in any kind of a threatening situation. So I wasn't able to represent my country that way. And something Henry Iba once said had always stuck with me. He was asked a question about coaching the Olympic team, which he did 3 times. And in 64, 68, and 64, 68, and 72, Henry Iba coached the Olympic team and was asked what this meant to him, coaching the Olympic team. And he said, when you coach your school, you represent your school and your state. And when you coach the Olympic team, you represent your country. And that really stuck with me. And I think that was something that I really, really wanted to do. And in 1981 had not obviously yet done it. And the next chance to do it would be in 84, and that's when I got a chance to do it. And I never regretted waiting for that chance to come.
So, something I don't hear mentioned about that team is that we weren't sure what international competition had been like for the last 8 years. We knew that they'd been making great strides, but having not played in the 80 Olympics, this was going to be the first chance to defend that gold medal from the 76 Olympics that, of course, Scott May and Quinn Buckner were a big part of.
But we had Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan made a little bit of difference on that team.
Was obviously a great...
Besides Jordan, though, one of my favorite ever sporting events I attended was not at all a game. They were the scrimmages from the Olympic tryouts here in Bloomington. It's the first I ever heard of Charles Barkley. It's the first I ever heard of John Stockton.
Well, it was also the first event ever in the Dome. Was the Olympic team
Yes.
up there, and the biggest basketball crowd still that
67,000.
they've ever had. But I remember it must have been 82 when you were informed, wasn't it? And how, to give you an idea how thrilled he was, I was covering a Big Ten track meet at Minnesota, and I think I had a note at the office to call. And when I got him by the phone, all he said was, "They picked me to coach the Olympic team." And it was the most emotion I can remember in his voice. It was really, that was just a dynamic moment, I know, in your life, and that gold medal evening had to be certainly on a level with any NCAA championships.
Well, I think the way that team represented the country, I mean, I told them when I got them together that basketball was our game. I mean, we invented it, we developed it. We sure as hell can't lose in Los Angeles. And the way they played, the way they conducted themselves, one of the great, maybe the greatest panoramic moment I've ever seen in a basketball game was that game, the pregame warm-up. We had blue jackets with red and white striped pants, and I've always like the candy striped pants.
Yeah, I noticed that.
They haven't changed yet, have they?
No, I'm sure they're a thing of the past. They'll go with a lot of things. But we also had red jackets with blue and white striped pants, and a 12-member squad, and they got it screwed up. And some kids brought the red jackets, and some kids brought the blue jackets. But you know what it was? It worked at divine intervention again. It worked out 6 and 6. And it was the greatest mixing
Looked like it was planned.
of red, white, and blue that you could. It was incredible. And I just sat, and as we were going through some stuff out there, and I said, how could it be any better?
Inspirational pregame talk to them before sending them out?
Well, we were in the locker room of the Los Angeles indoor soccer team in the Forum. And we came... the team, a big locker room, and I had chairs, kind of like we're sitting, and there's a chalkboard there. And actually it was a board with a crayon, and I had 5 defensive thoughts on one side of the board and 5 offensive thoughts on the other side, and I'd flip it over and so they'd see it and sit there and talk about it, and I'd talk about the 5 defensive things and the 5 offensive things. So I came out from in the back of this room, and teams all seated there, and they're quiet, and I mean, this is the gold medal. This is what we've worked for 8 weeks for. And I put my hand on the board to make a turd, and there's a piece of yellow legal paper there that I still have that says, "Coach, don't worry. We've put up with too much crap," spelled with 4 other letters, "to lose now," and no signature. But
didn't really need one.
It was in Jordan's handwriting. And I looked at that note, and I kind of turned around, and they're all really apprehensive as to what I'm going to say. And I look at Mike, and Mike's down, and he's looking at me like this. He's got his eyes up, but and I said, "Let's go." That's all. I said 2 words, "Let's go." And we're going out the door, and I turned to Don Danaher, and I said, "This game be over in 5 minutes." And that's about what it was.
What do you hope in the next several years your basketball legacy is?
Well, I've never really given that any thought. I hope that, I know when I started coaching, Coach Taylor told me, one thing you always have to do is share. I mean, you're asked to come to a clinic. You don't go and tell an hour and a half worth of stories. You go and you try to be entertaining, and you try to be informative. Whatever you're doing, you do. If you've got a little move that you make against the zone, show these coaches. Don't think that you have a right to withhold things from people. So I've always tried to, whatever we've done, whatever drills, whatever things we've put together or copied or changed a little bit from where we first might have seen them, I've always tried to, in every way possible, pass that on to other people. I've tried to make what we do available to anybody interested. So I hope that coaches will remember that I've really tried to help coaches. I think I've tried to help the game, and then I think that in addition to that, I've always been tough on kids. I've been difficult to play for, but I think those that have done it have benefited from it. I would hope that those that have played for me would always think that I've been fair and honest. It's like the most enjoyable moments I've had as a coach have been when working for fair and honest people.
Will we see another Bob Knight coach team?
Well, I didn't retire. I didn't quit coaching. If I were to put something on my passport indicating occupation, it would be teacher. And now, I guess what I'd have to put would be teacher for hire. But I spent this entire summer working on some things offensively that we'd never really done before, kind of a combination of a lot of things that I've used in motion offense, but going about it in a different way. And I was really anxious to, to get a little bit of a feel for what I was going to do. And I think to get this started, and looking forward to practice to use this with the kids that we have, and positioning, and I use the term we, the kids that were here, and that we're going to play, and what kids could play in what spots, and where the most advantageous spot was to use different kids. And I had a lot of fun working with that all summer long. On fishing trips, I always took my notes with me, and at night, after a day's fishing and supper, I'd come back in the cabin or in the tent sometimes and go through some of these things. So I've got that. I won't get to use it with the kids that I'd hoped to use it for, but I'm hoping that somewhere there's a group of kids that I'll have a chance to use this with.
We hope you've enjoyed some of the best memories of Bob Knight at Indiana University. Tomorrow night at 10:30, we return to Coach Knight's home for his version of the events that led to his firing at IU. Questions that haven't been answered, and answers that won't be interrupted. Plus, reaction from Isaiah Thomas.
You know, Coach has touched over 100 players, and, you know, out of maybe 120 or so players, maybe there's 5, well, I'll be generous. I'll say there's 10. But maybe there's 10 players that it didn't work out with, right? But the other 100, you know, who are saying, hey, you know, you need to take a different look at this guy than the way you're looking at it, no one's listening. You know, the players now who are here, who are currently playing for him, no one's listening. And that's the puzzling thing about this. But, you know, every story has its way of playing itself out. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, what will be best for Indiana University, I hope, is that, you know, the door remains open for there to be some type of reconciliation.
Hi, I'm Mark Patrick. Welcome to Bob Knight, the end of an era. Last night in part 1, Coach Knight took us through an emotional 25-year journey of his best moments at Indiana University. Tonight in part 2, the last 5 years, including Knight's take on his controversial firing, his relationship with university officials, and a compelling look into the side of Bob Knight that few have ever experienced. In a moment, Bob Knight, the end of an era. During our visit to the Knight home, the friends who were there to lend their support read like a who's who of basketball, including the Indiana Pacers' new coach, Isaiah Thomas. Do we see the name Bob Knight as a Pacer assistant coach?
I wouldn't necessarily say as an assistant, but hopefully as a consultant. You know, maybe in the background, helping me out with some things. I couldn't think of a better person to mentor me into coaching, similar to what Tex Winters has done with Phil Jackson, you know, in terms when he's with Chicago and now with Los Angeles. I think with us having a lot of younger players, a lot of kids who would right now be in college, some of the training methods and some of the drills and the thought processes that he's instilled into a lot of the players that he's had, maybe I can learn from those things.
Criticism of that move bother you at all?
No, I don't. I think when you're looking at a basketball brain, you're looking at Bob Knight as a genius. There aren't too many geniuses in the sport of basketball that's walking around today presently, and you have access to that mind. And I don't think he'll be unemployed long. You know, I'm sure there'll be a lot of other schools looking at him, just as there'll be a lot of other teams looking at him, just as I am.
What do you say to a kid that maybe approaches you at a Pacer function and says, Coach, I'd really like to know whether or not you think I should play for Bob Knight?
I would tell any kid that they should play for Bob Knight if they're good enough. I think what has happened here, when you look at any great person, any great mind such as Bob Knight, when you stay at one place so long, there's a tendency for a new regime to come in and just want change. He's had the opportunity to work with 3 different presidents, and I think philosophically, with this administration, they just don't mix. They just don't mix. So, maybe it is time to move on. Maybe it is time to find, someplace else and something else to do. I know he's hurt by it. I know his heart is here at Indiana University, and he would love to stay here and want to be here. But, time has a way of, ending relationships in sports. And maybe this isn't the final chapter. Maybe he'll get a chance to come back.
There's so many ironies in this story, and one is your continuing relationship with the coach, and then as you come back to Indiana, his departure occurs a couple of months later.
Well, they say that the Lord works in mysterious ways, and, maybe I'm here to catch the fall. And I just hope that when this is all said and done, the way this story plays out, we realize how special the man is and what he's done, and we're able to reset this story someday down the road so it can end the right way.
His most vocal supporters, his most ardent supporters among his ex-players are the older guys. You left in 1981, national championship year, and it took you a couple of years to come around to seeing some of the genius that you were just talking about.
Well, you grow up. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. And when you're 18, 19 years old, there's not one of us who's gone through the process that don't think we didn't know it all. At 18, 19, no one could tell you anything. I know everything. But then you get older and you go, you know what? Maybe he was right. And then you want to go back and apologize for all the stuff you put him through. But that's the same relationship you have with your mom and dad. You get to a point in time where mom doesn't know anything, dad doesn't know anything.
For a long time, they don't know much.
And then all of a sudden you have kids and you find yourself talking like mom and dad. And that's the same way it is, with the relationship that Coach has had with a lot of his players. And, you bring up the players, and I think what's interesting about this whole mix is that the players have no voice. Usually when a coach is gone, it's because of something that happened with his team or the players. But, Coach has touched over 100 players. And, out of maybe 120 or so players, maybe there's 5, well, I'll be generous. I'll say there's 10. But maybe there's 10 players that it didn't work out with, right? But the other 100, who are saying, hey, you need to take a different look at this guy than the way you're looking at it. No one's listening. The players now who are here, who are currently playing for him, no one's listening. And that's the puzzling thing about this. But, every story has its way of playing itself out. And, I think at the end of the day, what will be best for Indiana University, I hope, is that, the door remains open for there to be some type of reconciliation.
You've spanned an unbelievable change in the NBA alone, in the type of player that now plays in the NBA, the type of money that's there. Many of those same changes in style, probably even to a greater extent, have taken place in college. Do you think that Bob Knight is not a year 2000 coach?
Well, when you say that, I always relate, and I'll go back to my mother, right? My mom is not a year 2000 mom. Okay. But by the way, I'm glad she's not a 2000 mom. And I don't know if the 2000 coach is as good as the 70s and the 80s version. I don't know if the year 2000 mom is as good as the 50s and the 60s mom. I know my mom has, she look at some of the young kids today and she can't believe the things that they get away with. I look at some of the young kids today and I can't believe some of the things they get away with. Sure you do too. Now, can he adapt and can he change? Yes, he can. But I think the question that we really should be asking is, do we really want him to change, or do we want to hold our kids to a higher standard? Because right now, I think we all would agree that the bar has been lowered. So do we want the coach to lower his standards? Do I want my mom to lower her standards? Or do I want kids to raise their expectations and seek to become better? There's a bigger story here because of the genius of the man and what he's created at Indiana University. There is a special place in history for that we all need to be very conscious of.
We're going to take a break, and when we return...
Well, first of all, I wasn't asked to meet with the president. That's not true.
Welcome to the home of Bob Knight. We're joined again by Bob Hamill, the longtime sports editor of the Bloomington Herald. Forget the telephone for all of us old guys. Coach, perhaps just to lead off, some initial reaction regarding the ESPN interview.
Well, I answered some questions when I could get Jeremy to quit interrupting me. I actually kind of had some fun with that. His dad's been a long time, really good friend of mine, and as I've watched Jeremy do things, I think he's done a really good job. I think he might have been a little bit nervous last night, and hope that he'll look back over that and see that it's just a good thing to, when you've asked somebody a question, let him finish it. But I had a good time with him, and I thought that he did a very good job with it. Of course, not as good as you and the dog do, but you know, he has a lot of room to improve to get into the class of you two.
Bless you.
My son.
This is a side of you, a little bit of the upside of Bob Knight that a lot of people don't see. I saw in our first part that ran last night some emotion that I don't think a lot of people have ever had the opportunity to see of you. Why haven't we seen more of that side of Bob Knight rather than what I think the average person around the United States thinks of when you initially come to mind?
Well, I think what a person around the United States thinks of is what he reads, or what he sees when he sees me in a basketball game, or what is said. And I really appreciate a thing like I happened to be watching a football game one time, and Brent Musburger was doing the game, and he used me to define the intensity of one of the football coaches involved in the game, and that kind of thing I thought was very positive. But there's so much stuff written and said by people that I've never met or never been around. I've been with you in all kinds of things, you know, in professional things where we've done something like this, or at a golf tournament, or before a game, or at whatever. And so you see me in a lot of different settings. Most people don't, and so the opinion they have is what kind of a guy I am based on what they've read. But see, my thought in that, Mark, involves a number of things. Like, I basically have friends, really close friends here in Bloomington and in central Indiana that I've had for years and years and years. I have a secretary that's worked for me for 22 years, another one that's worked 19 years. I don't think anybody enjoys the number of players that come back, or the way players speak about having been a part of Indiana to any greater extent as a coach than I do. So if I'm supposed to be this thing that I'm often portrayed as, then why do all of those things happen? I made the the comment on the thing last night, that I sat down and listed all of the people that I've worked for, and like presidents or superintendents or president of the board of regents or trustees or the athletics committee at West Point. I listed everybody that I believe that I've worked for over all the time that I've been in athletics, and I think it was 43 people now. And of those 43 people, there are only 5 that I didn't get along with at all. Only 5. And unfortunately, 3 of those people have cropped up in the last 5 years.
The trustees have said they feel as if you failed them. They gave you a last chance, and then you thumbed your nose at them by refusing to meet with the president on the last weekend and going to Canada.
Well, first of all, I wasn't asked to meet with the president. That's not true. The president called me at 10:30 on Friday night. That's the first time that I had heard from the president since May 31st. Now, leading up to this, you know, it's out there that people are telling me that, well, I didn't do this and I didn't do that. I should have done this. I should have done that. That never happened. I was only ever told one time something that I should not do. And it really was kind of a violation, actually, of freedom of speech. But I had made a comment. I was introduced by my wife at a reception to raise money for cancer by Karen saying, you know, he gets from A to B better and quicker than anybody I've ever known. And so I, when I got up, said, well, you know, I can get from A to B in a hurry unless the Board of Trustees is somewhere between A and B. And subsequent to that, I was going on a fishing trip with Ed Williams, a former vice president here, and a guy that this administration was using as an intermediary with me. And Ed brought this up. He said, now, Bob, let me tell you something. He said, you just cannot talk about the Board of Trustees in public. And I said, okay. That was the last comment that I made about the Board of Trustees. So now I get this phone call on Friday night and at 10:30, and I'm asked to stay here while the president meets with the Board of Trustees so he can call me after he does so. Not meet with me, but call me. I just said, this is a fishing trip that I had planned with people that are counting on me to go, that has been paid for. People have paid for it. There's a lot of, and my plane leaves at 5 o'clock the next morning from Indianapolis. And I'm going up into eastern Quebec. And I just said, no. I said, I'm not going to stay for that. I said, I don't know whether there's a phone up there or not where I'm going, but I'm just not going to stay here for that.
You didn't feel like this might be it, and
sure
and
I did.
I need to be here to...
Back in May, I knew it was it back in May. I mean, there was no chance for me after May to live this thing through. Bob knew that. Bob urged me just to give it all up in May instead of staying through like I did. I don't think there was any way. And when I see some of the things that are said today, like, well, this has been an accumulation of things that we've watched over a period of time. Well, if the last thing that I talked to the president about on May 31st was, well, we've got all this behind us now, let's really work to go ahead and let's work together to get, well, if we're going to do that, and if it's you and I, then I think instead of accumulating things, I think I say something to you.
Given your, as well as people know you, they know you're inclined not to, in a sense, knuckle under. When they outlined all these things for you, and really, it was embarrassing to you, obviously, to be put in that position publicly. Why in the world did you stay?
Well, you know, I ask myself that now. I think the smart thing to do by far, the most intelligent thing to do by far, was for me to have left here even prior to last May. I mean, going back 5 years, I think I talked to you first seriously about leaving here. And then I did. And you've alluded to Mark, the teams that we've had weren't as good as some teams we've had. And while I think they were pretty good, I said they weren't really good. And I just had almost an obsession with getting us back to where we were really good. And then leaving under those circumstances, whether I continued to coach or not, whatever, how long I stayed, that's what I wanted. And I think in one way that overrode just being intelligent about the circumstances that existed here. This is not an administration under which I should coach. I'm not a coach for this administration, and knew that 5 years ago. But went through it, and it was just not the same feel that I had for things. And my wife felt that way. I mean, and I think she's made that pretty clear. So the smart decision is for me to go. I really believe the right decision was to stay because of the kids. The right decision in May was to stay because we're bringing in 5 kids that haven't played before, and now they're here because I recruited them, and I thought that was the right thing to do, but it wasn't the smart thing to do.
Can I read you something out of your contract?
Sure.
There's been controversy about what you have done and what more so you have not done with the athletic director at Indiana University. During the press conference that President Miles Brand had, he accused you of not having proper communication with the athletic director. Do you feel that's necessary with what I'm about to read you? During the period that coach is head basketball coach, he shall have approval of all matters associated with men's varsity basketball at Indiana, including, but not limited to, the following: facilities for practices, scheduling of games, related matters, practice times, recommended persons for broadcasts, selection of staff to include trainer, coaches, secretaries, and sports publicists for basketball. What is your take on that paragraph in your contract?
Well, I wrote that paragraph in 1981, and it was included in that contract that was set up in 1981 and has been there for 20 years. And that was to give me exclusive jurisdiction over the sport of men's basketball here at the university, simply because I didn't want any interference. I'm the guy that's in charge of basketball. I'm the guy that's going to be responsible for it. Okay, I'm going to run it. That's very similar to the guy in the NFL that's a general manager and the head coach, a lot like Parcells. Parcells wanted control of the team, the Jets. He got it. He had talked to me before that about what I had done and what I did as far as basketball here was concerned. And I read this to him. In fact, we discussed this very same thing. So what I have here, as it says, approval in all matters pertaining to men's basketball. So there's really no need for me to talk to the athletic director.
So you view your job as being outside the athletic department, and Clarence Doniger was not a person you should answer to?
No, I believe that my job was the director of basketball, athletic director for basketball. And when it comes to basketball, there really was no reason for the athletic director and I to have any interaction.
In your contract, it states coach shall make 4 speaking engagements per year at university functions. The selection of those functions shall be at coach's discretion, but shall include at least 2 varsity club functions. Should coach agree in his sole discretion to make more than 4 speaking engagements during the given year, such agreement shall not constitute a waiver of limitation. Aren't you, by not attending varsity club functions, really irritating the very people who you needed support from?
What it says there very clearly that I am required to attend 2 varsity club functions. I've attended far more than that over the course of a lot of years. On the advice of my attorney, I stuck strictly to 4 appearances. All right, 2 varsity club appearances. If it's a fiscal year, I've already made. If it's a calendar year, I've already made the 2 varsity club appearances. If it's a fiscal year, I would have made those in June. The other 2 are number 1 is a fundraiser in Southern Indiana, sponsored by the Indiana Alumni Association of Southern Indiana, alumni again in Southern Indiana, where we're going to raise probably $35,000 for cancer. How can anybody argue about spending an evening with 800 people, most of which are alumni, to raise money for cancer? And the second, and there's no way that I would have picked anything over this, was to spend an evening with the Indiana student body in Assembly Hall, which I have done for, I don't know how long, Bob, 20 years in various sites around the campus. So the necessity for me to go out and talk to groups, we can't sell any more tickets. You talk about support. We can't sell any more tickets. I'm better off looking at tape and working on basketball than I am traipsing all around talking to people. And that's why I included that in my contract back in 1981. That's a part of a 1981 contract.
Bob Knight, the end of an era, will return in a few moments.
Last night on ESPN's broadcast, I thought Gary Williams made some really good points. One of those, he talked about when he was coach at Ohio State and how when they came to Indiana, that you were the most powerful man in the state of Indiana, and that by the rope you had been given by some of the administrative members you're talking about at that time, how could the current administration expect you to back that off at a moment's notice after almost 30 years?
Well, I think that was a big part of the problem, Mark, and I think that's a very astute observation. I mean, I'd gotten used to running basketball, and nobody seemed to have a problem with that. As I said, Ralph and I were really close, personally and professionally, in the same way with Ed Williams the next 2 years. And I sensed right away in the change in athletic administration, and I told Bob this. I said, this is different. This is not going to be the same. There are going to be some problems here. There's a kind of a nervousness there as it's directed toward me over what I do and what I'm responsible for here. And I think you remember me talking to you about that.
Well, I think I also remember a lot of times when your feeling for the university and the program that you'd built, the pride in that came out, because I've seen you with those kids, and those kids now are fathers and almost grandfathers, some of them. But the feeling back and forth is a lot of teams, athletic teams, use the word family.
But I never have.
No, you haven't. But you have a family.
I understand that.
And it's something very
we have,
special.
without advertising it, without talking about it, without promoting it, a closeness that very few athletic programs anywhere in the country have.
So part of your closeness also involves people who are close to you. Who are you going to be talking to in these next few weeks when you're reorienting here?
Well, you know, if I was here, and I look back over people that have been here with me, Bill Armstrong, John Ryan,
George
Bunnell, Ed Williams, Dick Stoner, Ralph Floyd. Some of them are gone. Some are still around, and so I'll talk with them. And in addition to that, you know, I obviously talk to Parcells. I mean, I think that that Bill is one of the most astute and one of the most observant and one of the best analytical minds I've ever been around.
As well as one of your best friends.
And one of my closest friends. And Tony La Russa would fit into that same mold. And then there's nobody that, you know, I'd love to be able to talk to Coach Taylor, but he's no longer able to do that with the illnesses that he's had. Pete Newell, I'll talk to. Red Auerbach, I plan to go out and spend a day with Red and sit down and just seeing what direction he thinks I ought to go. I have great respect for Bill Polian, and I'll spend a little time with Bill Polian. Gil Brandt, another guy. I mean, there are some people that I think I just want their opinions on things and what they think.
You told us yesterday that you were a teacher, you were a coach, you were an unemployed teacher, but that you were gonna do that. That was your life what if you talk to that who's who of all-time sports figures, and 90% of them say, Coach, hang it up.
I just simply say to them, that's no alternative. Let's eliminate that one.
So you're not going to listen to them either?
Not on that point. I just say, that's not it. You know, I'm going to coach. You know, I want to coach. I mean, I want to see how my offense works. I mean, I've got an offense, as I told you yesterday, that I've worked on all year. I got to see how it works with the kind of kids that can work. And I just like the game too much. I mean, Pete Newell's 84, and he's still involved with basketball. And I can't, I used to always think that, okay, when it's time for me to retire, what I want to be able to do is have a feeling among coaches across the country that they would enjoy having me come by for a day or two and watch their team practice, and then tell them what I think of that team. That was kind of my ultimate objective after giving up coaching. And I think it probably still will be, but I'm a long way from reaching that point. And I actually feel through this, I think, even more energized and more determined, because I'm not burdened in my mind with the kind of administration that I've dealt with here in the past 5 years. I'm free from that now.
Do you really feel if the new school comes along and you've got the dollar figures, you've got a location, you've got those players you said that want to play for you, and then at the last minute they stick a contract under your nose that has a lot of guidelines on behavior, that has a lot of the things that you just really aren't sure you can abide by? Are you going to be able to do that? Or are you going to be able to?
I could have. I keep hearing how zero tolerance has been explained. That's absolutely not true. The policy and the sanctions that go along with zero tolerance is laid out there. But that's not the phrase zero tolerance. I mean, zero tolerance is ridiculous. The military tried it. It failed. Anybody that's ever tried that, it failed. I tried it, and it failed.
Darn well did.
So I've been no better than anybody else has been with it. Guidelines, fine. I'd look at them. There's specific things. You cannot get a technical foul. All right, I know that. I get a technical foul here. Well, what is that? I showed you a little while ago. I saw where inappropriate physical contact is that which is perceived to be so by the person contacted. All right? I'm sure that if I walk into a classroom and I just pat you on the back and walk on, you're a student, I'm sure that an awful lot of kids would say, hey, Coach Knight whacked me on the back today. God, that was great. You might be the guy that says that's inappropriate physical contact. I didn't like that. So this thing is, what I'm going to do is, I think, put my own guidelines together for Indiana's administration and the Board of Trustees, and I think I can help them have a much better university.
Have you thought, out of 30,000 people on this campus, the one student you decide to give a lesson in manners to happens to be the stepson of one of your most vitriolic critics, that it's perhaps fate that's moving you on?
Well, that may be. You know, I've never been a great believer in fate. I think fate is when you take good shots and don't swing at bad pitches. That's what I've always thought fate was. But that kid has enough of a burden with that guy as a stepfather. I mean, that's that kid's penance for life. But what I'd like to make clear is that kid was a kind of an anxious, flustered kid that I tried to help in a way that I think I would help any other kid under the same circumstances. And there's no way that he deserves anything like all the negative stuff that's being thrown at him. Forget that and let that kid go about his business and have to suffer through the stepfather that he has.
Coming up next on Bob Knight, the end of an era. I don't get the feeling that you realize who you are. One
of the avenues of revenue that Obviously, you must have turned down as director of basketball operations over the years with signage and Assembly Hall. Do you kind of expect that policy will change a little bit?
I think that advertisement is being sold in Assembly Hall yesterday, maybe even before it was officially announced that I was not going to be retained as the coach. We'll see advertisements for dog biscuits, potato chips, hamburgers, all kinds of things in there. And I always wanted to keep it just as pure as possible, just basketball and Indiana. There were no Big Ten markings in there, nothing from the other schools in the conference. I mean, Assembly Hall to me has always been kind of a sacred place where Indiana plays basketball.
Did you ever envision either a new arena or that arena eventually being named after you?
No. Why would they name that after me? I mean, I'm a basketball coach. Name it after Herman Wells, or name it after somebody that's had a great impact on this university. Name it after John Ryan. I don't know anybody here right now we could name it after. but no, it's just like the thing I mentioned last night that was kind of interesting to me was Pat coming here and saying that he had found the balls under a pile of sweatshirts in the locker room that marked the 600th and 700th coaching victories that I had. I think that's an indicator of just how much that kind of stuff means to me.
You remember what the 700th was?
Nope.
I think it was Wisconsin.
I have no idea.
See, people have a hard time believing because there are so many people in the world that are goal-oriented that you wouldn't want to end your career as the all-time winningest coach in NCAA history. People, I mean, those are very skeptical statements that you make, but points like those stories make them real.
Well,
I don't understand why you don't show that more. I mean, that's always been my thing. You do things that I just go, oh, why are you doing that? Why do you say that? And I kind of understand. I don't get the feeling that you realize who you are. And even these goals seem to say that to me.
Well, you know, I've never thought I was anything but a basketball coach. And how important in the world is basketball coach? If you took the basketball program and a few other things out of this university, it would still be a great university. Losing the basketball program here would not change the university in one bit. It would be a great university. The university would be improved immeasurably by eliminating a couple other things here. But essentially, that's how important basketball is.
I apologize for interrupting. I apologize for interrupting.
Okay, Jeremy,
but
go ahead.
One of the points. You're making statements about other parts of the university. Somebody said, okay, if you're just a basketball coach, why do you care? What business is it of yours? Just run the basketball program.
Well, but unfortunately, here in the last 5 years, that hasn't necessarily been the way the whole thing has operated. I'm content to just run the basketball program. I'm content to run it as we have in the black every year. Sometimes we're the only and always one of the very few athletic teams here that operates within its budget. We've done things through endowing scholarships, the money that we save in a variety of ways. Our basketball program, the way we've run it, has poured hundreds of thousands of dollars back into the athletic program to be used for other sports. And this does not even involve ticket revenue or television revenue. So I don't know about the things that goals and the things you're talking about. To me, basketball, it happens to be what I do, and I think I'm good at it, but I never thought it was particularly important.
Some other people came to see you, and one of them was Isaiah Thomas. First of all, he made it very clear that he would like to have you around. Do you have any interest that way? And what was your feeling about Isaiah's coming down?
Well, when I saw him walking down the driveway, I was standing in there, maybe even talking to you, and when he was walking down the driveway, it brought tears to my eyes to think that, I'm saying to myself, boy, I can't be that bad a guy if this kid is taking a day out of his life to come down here and see if he can help me. And that's what I thought with all of these guys that have done that. And with him, very much so. And you were around yesterday, and you know how hard he worked at seeing what we could do and how we could do things and what could be done. And that's been very important to me. And I think the thing that I find that's kind of interesting is that each of these kids is just totally shocked when I go through kind of some of the things that have happened. Like, I think more than anything else, I find people to be extremely shocked by the fact that allegations have come up twice now, May and here, and I have never had a chance to answer those allegations. Going back to a question you asked me earlier, Mark, if this president says, Bob, I'd like to have you stay here while we go through these things with you and give you a chance to tell us what your reaction is, I'd have stayed. There's no question about that. But to stay for a phone call?
If I can bring up Isaiah one more time, do you have any interest in... He was the first to come after you with a genuine job offer.
Well, he was and he wasn't. There were a couple of things that I haven't talked to you about.
but don't you aspire to be the next Tex winner?
Well, not for a few years. But let me tell you about that now. It really pleased me. And I told Isaiah, I said, hey, I'll come watch you practice. I'll come watch you play. What kind of a commitment I want to make at this point, I really don't know. I've got to sit on that for a while. But I'll sure do whatever you want me to do in terms of analyzing and sharing that with you.
You realistically think you could go to a Pacer game and sit there and not be bothered?
No, I think that what do you mean by not being bothered?
Well, I mean that you need to sit there, and I've seen scouts at work. I've sat next to guys I couldn't believe I was sitting next to, Rudy Tomjanovich, when he was a coach, because I remembered him from his Michigan days, and being Rick Mount's big nemesis in the Big Ten that year.
He got 48 against the Hoosiers. He wasn't real kind to them either.
But point being, I could sit. I had an unbelievably great conversation with Rudy Tomjanovich. He still got his job done scouting the game and was totally unbothered, because I think I might have been the only soul at the time, this was before he became the Rockets head coach, that knew who he was. Whereas you walk into a building, it becomes electrified. It's not going to be unlike Assembly Hall. One way or the other, you're a polarizing figure. You bring out emotion in people. How are you going to go in and expect to do any kind of job?
Oh, I don't think I have any problem at all. I mean, that what you're saying there is, how can I go into an arena, whether it's Assembly Hall or wherever it is, and do any kind of a job? I mean, that's the same thing. I mean,
an Assembly Hall,
no, it isn't. I think that's exactly the same thing. I go in, I sit on the bench, I coach. I go in here, I sit at the scouts table, I sit up in a box somewhere. I have a disguise, whatever. I mean,
See, that wasn't the part I picked up on, the disguise.
I go in.
Actually, that was being talked. There was a possibility of that.
You talk about Isaiah, the people that have come to see you here at your home, the friends, the family. How much have you been buoyed by that presence?
Well, I know it's there, and it just really pleases me that guys come around or they call. But that's what our whole thing here has all been about. It isn't Indiana University. It's the Indiana basketball atmosphere that I mentioned the other day that we've all created here. There have been administrators involved, not recently in it, but professors involved. Bob Burns, Harry Prater,
Drew
Schwartz, Bill Wiggins. There have been a lot of guys involved in this. The Army, the whole thing, managers, players, all the coaches that we've had here. And when I see an Isaiah Thomas come down, I say, and here's a polished, really intelligent, intelligent, well-spoken guy that's going to be able to do anything he wants to do. And whether it's him or whether it's Brian Sloan, who's a doctor today, that I once told, I'm not sure how you're going to get into medical school, and he did it on his own. I say to myself, we helped with that. That guy was helped by being a part of our atmosphere. And every time I see one of our kids, that just makes me feel good about what we've all done here. And now I'm just anxious to go somewhere else and create the same thing. I created it here. I'll create it somewhere else. And I'm looking to be a part of extending that to other kids.
Bob Knight, the end of an era, will return in a few moments. You have left Indiana University, and there are two lives that might be most directly affected by this, and those would be your sons. Tim, who grew up here, Patrick, who grew up here, both essentially know this as their only home. If you move on, what happens to their futures? What are their thoughts?
Well, Tim has kind of been in business on his own for the last 10 or 12 years, maybe 10 years anyhow, and he's done really well, and he's been a real asset to us. He's helped us a great deal with basketball. He's been good to kids. He's helped us. He's done things that have been very good for Indiana basketball over the years. But and Tim will be fine, and wherever he and Darcy and Brady decide to go from here. Pat is the one that really gets hurt in this thing, really hurt. Pat is as responsible as I am or anybody else is for what we have here right now in terms of talent, which I think is, across the board, better than we've had here in maybe 7 or 8 seasons since Cheney was here. And Pat has really helped in the recruiting of that talent, and he's helped in developing what we have here. And he's done a great job with the getting these different players together and combining them into a real team-oriented group of kids. And nobody's even talked to Pat about anything. Nobody talked to him about staying here. Pat apparently was fired because he was my son. And not a thing has been said or done for Pat, to Pat. Pat is absolutely totally responsible for the 2 guys that are going to be coaching the team this year, even being here. He recommended both of them to me and really worked hard to persuade me to hire both Davis and Treloar. And yet nobody, including them, has even talked to Pat. And so of all people affected by this, the one that I'm concerned most about is Pat.
You have a chance to write the line that would be on your gravestone. What would it say under Bob Knight?
I think it would simply say he was honest, he did what he thought was right, and he really didn't kiss anybody's ass. I'd be happy with that. And I might put just a little P.S. on that epitaph that would read like this: and every once in a while, he did think that he was wrong.
Perhaps the Bob Knight era will never really end in Indiana. An ancient allegory might capture it best. A man once had a very powerful elephant. 6 blind men had heard of this beast and longed to experience it. They were invited to touch the elephant. The first blind man touched the animal's side and said, "The elephant is like a wall." The second touched his trunk and said, "No, the elephant is like a snake." The third blind man grabbed the beast's tusk and said, "This elephant, it's like a spear." The fourth believed the animal was like a tree, for he was touching a leg. The fifth grabbed a giant ear and proclaimed the elephant to be like a fan, while the sixth knew the elephant to be like a rope, since he was touching its tail. The owner told the blind men that they were all right, and yet they were all wrong, because each of them only knew part of the elephant. What they could not know is that the total elephant could carry the 6 men home. In the past week, Bob Knight's load has been lessened. Good night.